Can functional mushrooms like lion's mane, reishi, chaga have similar effects on the brain as psychedelic mushrooms like psilocybin?
I think you'll be interested to find out that answer. And who better to talk about this than the founders of Gwella with their Mojo product who make this claim. So we're talking with them today. And at the very end, in our lab results section, Chloe and I decide that
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Decision Lab podcast. Today, we're talking to Peter and Daniel. They are the founders of Gwella. Welcome. We're so excited to have you two here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
first time we're doing two, so I'm excited to see how this goes. It'll be fun. We've got a double feature here. I would love to, if you guys could, both of you, give us a little bit about your life. What's your background? How did you become the person you are today?
Daniel, I guess I can start first. Daniel Sanders, Chief Scientific Officer here at Gwella Mushrooms. I guess we can go back to 2016, where I helped found my first company with a partner of mine. I was going through college at the time as molecular biotechnology, genetic engineering background focus. At the time, I was managing a laboratory at St. Vincent's Health Hospital, and we were doing genetic engineering and analysis on plant models. Through that venture, we decided to raise capital to start an analytical testing laboratory, testing Schedule 1 substances, as well as blood, plasma, urine, things that the hospital needed tested within our local market. Through 2020, I served as COO at that company, and towards the end of my tenure, I spent time investing in starting up an extraction refinement facility for botanicals, botanical extracts. 2022, majority interest in that company was purchased. I went into private consulting. After that, I basically spent 5 years touring the country, consulting on product development, pharmaceutical development. So that's new drug analyses, laboratory setup, things of that nature. And then, long scale is manufacturing and how to basically take a product from a idea all the way through pipeline to a finished good. So that's both in dietary supplement as well as pharmaceutical product.
What a wild time. What about you, Peter?
Yeah, my background is far less impressive, I must admit. So I'm born in Australia, raised in the UK, moved over to Canada, about 13 or 14 years ago. Career-wise, I've always been kind of all over the map. I actually went to school for music and then quickly realized that, it would probably be a lot of hard work and probably not that, bigger payoff, and I'd be relatively mediocre at it. And so I kind of switched out of that and went into computer science, which was a real curveball. I enjoyed it. It was just at a time when, web design was happening and all of this stuff, but equally realized that, I wasn't fantastic at it. I'd have to work very hard to be mediocre again. And so, I poddled around on different things. I ended up joining some TV company, early TV startups. One was a shopping channel, doing kind of audio engineering, sound design, things like that. But then I finally found my way to an agency in the UK and started work on more of the sales kind of marketing side. Loved it. I ended up taking one of their products back to Australia and moved back to Australia for a little bit. And then my girlfriend at the time was Canadian, and so she wanted to move back to Canada, and I was like, fine. Finished this kind of Australia chapter in my life and moved to Canada, really with no plans to stick around or no specific ideas for a company, but I found somebody who was just starting an agency and joined him, and we ended up growing that agency for 6 years. I sold that agency and then started another one called Abacus, grew that agency and then merged that into another one 3 years ago to become Academy. Whilst doing all of that, I started launching product companies out of the agencies. Our first one was just at the time in Canada when cannabis was legalizing, and that was interesting to me for two reasons. I mean, one, I was a massive weed smoker when I was younger, albeit, I don't really anymore, but, it'd always been a part of my life. But two, there was massive capital flows into cannabis and a lot of business interest. And so we started a company that made pre-rolls, dried flower, vapes. It was kind of a house of brands. Ended up building that up, selling it. We also did a company making blunts in California, which is still going. When I exited out of that cannabis business, I really liked the kind of the product side versus, the agency service side. And so I wanted to do something else. I wanted to do something else that I was really passionate about this time. Like cannabis was interesting, but like I said, I wasn't really a consumer. I hadn't been for a long time. So one area that I was super excited about was mushrooms and functional mushrooms, and then also psychedelics. For as long as I can remember, I've been somewhat neurotic about my health. Like I've taken lots of supplements since, being a teenager. I discovered functional mushrooms in my 20s and used to boil up chaga and things like that. And then when Four Sigmatic came out, loved this kind of, more convenient version of the SKU. So I was super interested in functional mushrooms, what they can do from a health and wellness standpoint, but also psychedelics. That had been a part of my life from age 16, in the UK growing up. Psilocybin was legal for a period of time. And so, used to go out to the woods with my friend and, go on some wild adventures, some beautiful, some terrifying, everything in between. But I became fascinated with, entheogens and different substances. I used to look up different substances online, and then we would, like Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds and things like that. And we would go on Erowid, research them and play around with them. So I was always really interested in what that could do from a consciousness standpoint, but also, what the science was, what the history was, people using these substances throughout history. And so the idea came like 19 for this, creating a company that tried to connect the dots between some of these threads. And that's where Gwella came from, was this, I wanted to create a product company that harnessed the power of functional mushrooms, but also, spoke to some of this psychedelia and this growing trend in wellness and psychedelics, or psychedelics and medicine. And so initially it was just an idea. It was, wouldn't it be cool if we could make a company that helped normalize this and help make products and make using these substances a lot easier? Now, at the time as well, there was all of this interest in psychedelics in Canada and in the US, kind of, public companies being funded that very specifically looked at the medical applications. And Gwella was kind of different in that, we really just wanted to explore what people could use them for from a wellness standpoint, from a self-improvement standpoint. So we set up the company. I met Danial at a virtual conference, was introduced by a colleague, and the rest was history. We had this idea early on of like, could we create a product that mimics the benefits of a microdose, but make it legally? So all of those things you think about why people microdose, cognitive enhancements, flow state, mood enhancement, all of that kind of stuff. We're like, what could we do to mimic some of those benefits so we could sell this legally as a D2C product and brand? And that's where Mojo came from. And Danial already had a bit of a formulation that he invented in college, kind of trying to mimic Adderall for his own personal studying. And so we brought this formulation into Gwella and perfected it. I would say to start with, it was incredibly strong, way too strong for me, very stimulant forward. And we had to, spend a year dialing it in before we could actually start selling it as a consumer ready product. But I'll pause there. That was a long spiel.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It was good. Do you think if we had known you guys in middle school, would we have known you'd start this company?
I mean, not me. I was never into business. I mean, middle school, I was quite academic, but also quite, by middle school, I don't know what middle school is in UK terms. Certainly by 15, 16, I was kind of punk rock, skateboarding, that kind of stuff. Not very into commerce and capitalism, let's put it that way. So it wouldn't have really been on my agenda to start a company. I don't know about you, Daniel. I mean, you've got a bit more of a entrepreneurial lineage.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily about starting a company. In middle school and through like all of grade school and high school, I was very hyper focused on science and mathematics, right? And so I spent a lot of time in my books through college. And so like I think maybe it's a little different than what I would have projected back then, because that probably would have been more research focused, working in a laboratory, which I did through my early career. And then it wasn't until probably through middle of college that I started picking up some of the more business sides of creating a company, doing research in conjunction with understanding how capital flows in and out of your cost centers for research, right? And then understanding that sometimes, if you're in academics, there's not always a whole lot of money there, but also on the other side of the fence, in the private sector, there is sometimes money there to be able to pursue the research that can allow you to bring products to market to help people. And so, like, I don't feel like I actually got a firm grasp of understanding that sometimes research stops because of access to capital until probably early into college, right? So, yeah, I was very focused on science my entire life, but business less so until I got into college.
What's it take to be the like chief science officer of a company? Like, is that like bachelor's, master's, PhD, MD? Like, what was it like?
Yeah, so it really depends on what the company is. I've served as both CSO here with Gwella, as well as I've served as the lead drug development scientist for a public company called Albert Labs. And so, like, in my tenure in these positions, I've both, hired a lot of doctors, I've fired a lot of doctors. At the end of the day, the biggest thing that we always look at is what is people's inspiration, what is their want to show up to work, what is their want to learn, and then what previous experience can they draw from. Personally, I've got a BS degree within genetic engineering with a extra focus on it. It's additional 2 years of emphasis for research. There was two genetic routes. One was for specifically to go down kind of like the medical field, going MD or DO route. And then there was a second side of that, which was 100% research emphasis, which is additional 2 years, pretty close to equivalent of master's. But most of my experience is actually work related. So I spent 4 or 5 years doing analytical chemistry in the laboratory we started up. So, from a education standpoint, I never tell people that they have to pursue a particular educational path or a degree, because when I look and I hire people, I don't just look at what their degree is, I look at what their work experience is. And both, a lot of times you can, a lot of times you can look at someone's work experience if they have 4 years in a laboratory. It's a lot of times better than even some students with a master's degree, right? So, it's really dependent on the individual.
Got it.
Right, that completely makes sense. I'm really curious, like on the personal side of things, like what internal battles have you gone through that have defined you today? Like whether that's like self-doubt, burnout, or difficult life circumstances, what shaped you?
I mean, running a company is this constant exercise of overcoming self-doubt and panic, but also joy. I had somebody describe business, but also life as this sine wave. And, there's these kind of ups and downs and peaks and troughs. But, you really can't get too carried away with the peaks. I'm the best, I'm winning, nothing can ever go wrong. Or the troughs, I'm the worst, I'm terrible, this thing's going really badly. You kind of have to get to this point where you can, be like water almost, and somewhat meditative about it all. And it's really the only way I think you can stay sane. But all of my businesses have had capital constraints. Where are the sales going to come from? All of those kind of regular challenges that you can imagine. With Gwella, we're in a place now where the brand's established. It's really about scale. So all of those kind of early possible going to kill the company type things have kind of morphed into something else. Now it's about, how do we make sure we have enough cash in the bank to finance this next purchase order from this XYZ retailer and things like that. Whereas early on, it's like, is this even going to be a thing? Kind of existential threats. And because it's a VC funded business as well, obviously there's all of that stuff that you can imagine with raising capital and, having to speak to people and one person saying yes and doing all of that kind of stuff. So it's really the usual just traumas and challenges that you can imagine with running a company.
How do those show up for you though? Anxiety, stress, depression, imposter syndrome, burnout? Like, what does that look like for you on the inside?
I definitely have I complained to Daniel about it, thinking about, cash in the bank and things like that. I mean, it's really more like an ambient level of anxiety. Of course, there's, ups and downs where it gets more intense or less intense and you get a win and that kind of is, dialed down a little bit, but then something happens. I mean, we've had so many things happen with Gwella that just like we had a trademark issue a couple of years ago from a errant malicious actor who managed to take down our Shopify store. And I remember arriving to my wife's family's for Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, and it was like we were on the pre-drink, it was lunchtime. I was just about to go over to their house, and then boom, our website goes down. It's like, why is it down? Oh, this thing over here that I thought was only a small problem has just blown up into a massive problem, and it took it down from Amazon as well, and then we had to sell on Amazon under a different bag for a different brand for a whole year. Now the Shopify store took 3 weeks to get back up, but you can imagine for a D2C store that's reliant on those day-to-day sales, that was quite panic-inducing. So,
Yeah,
we've had lots of things like that.
got it. What about you, Daniel?
Honestly, it's just like what Peter said. Like, imagine walking on coals, right? And you're walking on these coals almost every single day, creating a company and trying to scale it, and then you get to the end of the path and you're like, this is great. And then you turn around and you walk again, right? And so like creating a company is exactly like that, right? There's really, really great sections of it and there's really hard parts in it. But what normally matters is the people you surround yourself with and how you make it through those difficult times. And I think that kind of resonates across all of life, right? Like there's really beautiful times in life and there's really hard times. And within a company, it's that exact same thing. For me personally, normally when I'm stressed, I'm not one of those people that kind of like shut down. I get more into my work and then that creates burnout, right? And so like I'll be up for, you know, 12, 14, 15-hour days for weeks at a time. And then boom, I suddenly will be down for 2 days. Right. And so like I'm one of those ones that are like really stimulated when I'm inside of those really stressful moments. And then for me, like it does show up in the terms of like, wanting to push myself too hard and not listening to my own, body's rhythms.
Makes sense. Something we don't get to ask people because we don't usually have two people on that I just came to my brain is Daniel. What is something about Peter that you respect that you don't get to voice often?
One thing that I think Peter's really, really good at, and you'll see it in this podcast, is he's really good at getting across a point and he's really good at telling a story. And I think it takes a very particular person to both do podcasts, but as well as to be able to like talk in a clear and thoughtful way. And Peter is really, really good at that. But also he's just a great person, right? Like he's very calm, collective, cool-headed. I don't think I've ever seen Peter mad. Maybe once when this trademarking thing was going on.
Oof.
4 years, 5 years. So like yeah, phenomenal person.
All right, Peter. What about you? What's something you respect about Daniel that you don't get to voice often?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the calm, cool, and collect as well, because it may seem like it sometimes on the outside, but I really don't think of myself as super calm. I feel like, I'm quite agitated and, a little bit all over the place, but have the ability to kind of dial it in. But Daniel for sure has complete control over his emotional state, and he's also very logical. Obviously, he's got talent when it comes to all of the science type stuff, but we're a nice pair in that, I'm a bit more, to Daniel's point, like salesy, financing-y, that type of stuff. I can sell a story and, vision, all of that stuff. But Daniel is incredible at developing products. And he's, like I said, very calm, cool, and collected in all situations. Same thing. I mean, I don't think I remember seeing Daniel mad, particularly at anything. He's also just got a vast knowledge of interesting things that interest me as well, on the esoteric and entheogen side. So he's a nice combination of, the skills that Mojo Gwella needs to execute, but kind of thinking about the kind of high level mission of introducing more and more people to this stuff. We're both very aligned on that.
I love that. It's Men's Mental Health Month, so it's always nice to hype each other up for a little bit. Let's move into the claim to fame section where we kind of get to talk about specifically your company and the story. We talked about the people now. Chloe, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so if you had to describe and tell us what Gwella is and why we should care in under 60 seconds, what would you say?
Well, this would evolve now because what Gwella was in 2020 has massively shifted. Had you asked me in 2020, it would have been, Gwella is a company that's interested in introducing more people to the power of functional and psychedelic mushrooms through, support tools, education, and direct-to-consumer type products. But really, once we'd launched Mojo, all of our energy went into Mojo as this sub-brand. Initially, the idea was we're going to launch all of these different sub-brands and support tools and things like that. Now, Gwella, if you go to gwellamushrooms.com now, you'll see all of the educational resources. And I'm really proud of all of that stuff. It's got guides on how to think about certain substances from a usage standpoint, but also harm reduction standpoint. So all of that stuff there. But like I said, Mojo just became this all-encompassing thing for us. So the vast amount of our time and resources are spent on Mojo. Initially, the idea with Mojo was let's create a product that mimics a microdose in legal form, that's tasty, that's convenient, easy for people to take. And so that's why it's a gummy. That's why it tastes the way it does. And that's why it has the effects that it does, this kind of cognitive improvement, mood modulation, energy, focus, things like that. But over time, our community base has been like, we'd love, what else can you be doing with functional mushrooms and these formulations and botanicals and adaptogens? And so, 2 years ago, we launched our passion and libido gummy because we polled our community. I was like, what else are you interested in? And so we introduced a product that had kanna as well as, all of these other adaptogens, cordyceps, things like that. Last year, we launched our sleep gummy that has magnesium, L-theanine, GABA, etc. in it, and lion's mane. And then, reishi. And so we've got 6 more use cases in the bank that we're getting ready to launch with. And all of these are kind of thought about in partnership with our community and what are people interested in us doing. So now, Mojo has become this company where we find interesting ingredients, botanicals, adaptogens, and mushrooms, and put them into easily usable, tasty formats, i.e. gummies, that target different use cases or challenges or objectives. So that could be energy focus, that could be sleep, that could be libido, passion, and any of these new ones that we're launching. So that's our goal, is to find the best of nature, stack them in synergistic formulations, pack them in a nice tasty gummy and sell them.
I like that. Daniel, you seem to be the one initially who was the mad scientist trying to recreate Adderall in his dorm room. Why did you decide to try to create your own formulation instead of using Magnetic Mind or MindLab Pro or any like Alpha, any of these things that were out there already? Why start your own? Why create your own?
Well, back when I was mixing that combination up, it didn't exist, right? Alpha Mind didn't exist. Alpha Brain didn't exist, none of that. And so I was very much called a biohacker at the time, looking to see what worked best with my body. Caffeine was okay, but for me, it was always overly stimulating and it wasn't very mellow. And so going through college, given what my course load was and everything else I was doing outside of school, I came across quite a few different molecules that seemed really interesting at the time. Now, the stack was a bit more intense than what's in Mojo, but it was about 15 different ingredients that was mixed together, and I would drink it. Tasted horrible. It was the worst thing to consume, and I consumed it for about 2 years, right? And what stopped me from keeping on consuming it was the amount of time it took to mix these 15 ingredients up, put it inside of a cup, drink it. Like, I couldn't do it for longer than 2 years, right? And so that kind of fell behind in my story of my daily ritual until 2020, when Peter and I met, and this idea of, hey, let's create a product that's really it's really targeted to energy, targeted to clarity, it's targeted to mental focus. And I instantly thought back to those college days of what I was mixing up. Now, granted, back then, that mixture included like some of your racetam compounds, which are kind of gray area. They're not allowed in dietary supplements. And so we pulled those out and we subbed in mushrooms. Back then, I didn't have mushrooms in it, right? So I layered mushrooms on top of it. And that's what basically created Mojo to this day.
Damn, that's cool. I like that.
I'll
How
never
did you
forget.
guys? You go.
I'll never forget the first time I sent Peter and our COO at the time samples of the first iteration of the product. And I get a phone call, and they're in Canada, I'm in the US, and I hear in their voice this little bit of stress, and they're all like, they sound very like talkative. I'm like, you tried the samples, didn't you? Like, yeah, they're too strong. And Peter, quote unquote, was like, these are like jet fuel. We need to dial this back. I was like, all right, let me decrease the.
What was that like? What the first sample that you tried? What happened?
I mean, it was just, let's just say very stimulant forward. Personally, I'm quite sensitive to stimulants as well. So, it's like that kind of agitated, over caffeinated doesn't quite frame it right. Like, it wasn't drinking 2 or 3 espressos. It was more than that. It was just like, locked in, but, just too stimulated. It was also like, because of all of that stuff, it tasted just an explosion of bitterness in your mouth. So from every angle, like we've got a lot of work to do on this taste, texture, effect. We really, initially it was like we took it ourselves over and over again. So we had a lot of experiences just like that kind of overstimulated experience. But then we started giving it out to friends. And then, initially we sold it on a very janky old Shopify kind of not well designed store, just putting the feelers out there. What do people like? And so we slowly like ratcheted it up, gathering more data at each level. By the time we launched it was like the end of 2021. We were really happy with the formulation.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that. Who's your guys' like ideal customer? Like, and what dream outcome do you have for them if the product works perfectly?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few people that we've noticed. First off, to start with, I thought this would be mostly, a trendy millennial Gen Z-ish type of brand. That's kind of the branding kind of followed some of that aesthetic. And I thought it would probably be, younger people that want a pick me up in the office, white collar worker type, stuff. Probably because that was somewhat my frame of reference, which isn't usually the best way to develop products. But we also had this idea, it was like, what about people who play video games? They all drink really disgusting energy drinks. Could we give them a healthy replacement? But, turns out that they didn't really care about the healthy replacement piece. They just perfectly happy drinking the energy drinks the way they were. And so that wasn't really a good fit. I would say like we cast a very wide net over to start with, and really the brand and the messaging has followed consumer demand. And where it is now, I think it's more, certainly millennial and up demographic. There's specific use cases that jump out as this is why people truly love the product. One of those is people that have minor mood disorders or, attention deficit disorder, ADD, ADHD. That has been like something where we've seen people, those are the subscribers that truly fall in love with Mojo, is people that have, something going on. Maybe they don't want to medicate, maybe they're undiagnosed, but they suspect they have something going on. They try Mojo and it solves the issue. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like, busy parents, that just need a bit of a pick me up, maybe coffee, to Daniel's point, they don't want to have another coffee at 3 o'clock. They don't want to disrupt their sleep. They don't particularly like the jittery feeling that you get with coffee. And so a Mojo, late morning, early afternoon helps them get through the day, helps them do all of the tasks, but doesn't disrupt their sleep and doesn't give them jitters. So, I'd say, the busy parent cohort's really, a good cohort for us, the ADHD mood disorder crowd. But also there's this group of people that love them as like, pre-workouts and things like that. I'm going to go on a hike. I'm going to take a Mojo. I mean, certainly like I really like them as part of my pre-workout routine. There's these different interest groups. I would just kind of describe them that like the initial focus and energy gummies. And then, with things like sleep, who doesn't need better sleep? Most people need better sleep. And so that really fits all sorts of people. But what we found, certainly when we were thinking about like younger people, is that, this is a cohort that probably doesn't need that much energy. They don't really care about getting better sleep. So, it's really, as you get older, say to my age, you really, you want a bit more energy. You think about this stuff more. You need to optimize towards better sleep, things like that. And so, yeah, there's like age brackets that work really well, but, use cases and people suffering from specific things that Mojo really changes their life.
I think that's maybe one of my more favorite emerging categories is in the 50 plus category. Wow. My father, he lives down in Florida, is actually guilty of this. He'll go around and hand out Mojo to all his friends down there, all 50 plus, and just to hear and get texts for them saying, hey, this has changed my life. This has allowed me to get up out of bed and actually go walk around the block. Like, those are really heartfelt and touching stories that I get to hear firsthand from him passing out our product to people around him in Florida. And so like that's an emerging category that we're realizing that, people that are 50 plus are having energy issues. They can't run to coffee. That doesn't work for them, or it doesn't agree with their stomach, or, they can't obviously go to energy drink because they're heavily loaded with sugars, right? And so Mojo is a really good alternative because, yeah, there's sugar in it, but you're taking one gummy, you're taking 2 gummies. We're talking about a gram or 2. Yeah. Right. So like it's been a really good alternative for some of these people.
Awesome. Daniel, what's the most broken or frustrating part about the supplement industry? Because what we've noticed is it's just like the Wild West, and there's so many people doing things the right way and so many people doing things the wrong way. So I would love to hear your perspective on this.
One of the, call it the most broken things within the industry is that there are a lot of manufacturers that don't necessarily take due cause to vet out their ingredients, or they don't, they don't choose the right ingredients to put within a product that makes them overall healthy, right? There's a lot of, call them sugar substitute, like your maltitols or sorbitols. They're not very good for your gut, and they're not very good for you as sugar alternatives. But people chase after a sugar-free option, and boom, like, you only have a couple things you can choose, right? You can choose maltitol, erythritol, tapioca-resistant dextrins, stuff like that for sugar-free options. But in general, there's not a firm like grasping within the marketplace as to what's truly healthy to take and what not to take. And part of that comes to us as product manufacturers to educate the population and have like a general quality of standards. So that's kind of the more frustrating thing, is trying to like push back against some of those norms that are created based on PR from individuals that are spending a lot of advertising dollars, right? So that's kind of one of the more frustrating things. I mean, I oversee a large manufacturing site, so we do butt up against people that are importing products from overseas that aren't necessarily, meeting label claims. They aren't even the same product as what's inside the package. For example, I got sent creatine gummies from China. There's 0 creatine in them. And so like these are things that we run into in the dietary supplement field, that the biggest thing for a consumer is to find a product that they align with, consume it, make sure it works for them, and then try not to deviate too much from that particular manufacturer, because they've already showed proof of case. And we've seen tons of products on Amazon and that come over from overseas that are just not effective, and they don't have what it says on the label.
How do you know that though? Most consumers aren't engineers. How would you and Chloe know that, whereas we wouldn't maybe?
I'll use the creatine as an example because we do
Yeah.
a lot of creatine manufacturing at our site. If you ever pick up a creatine gummy and you can see directly through it, it's not real. It doesn't have creatine in it. You have to put a lot of powder inside of a product for it to test out. From a general consumer standpoint, that would be your best way to identify that, besides sending it out for laboratory testing. The other way of doing that is certifying that the product is manufactured within the US. And that's one thing that at least gives you one more step of compliance on top of it. And one more step of being able to chase down a company and ask questions. There's a lot of drop shippers that import product from China that are just not good products.
Are there any at-home testing kits or anything that you like? I love the looking through the gummy thing. That's easy, but you said you have to send it to a lab. Is there anything like at-home type stuff you could do, or that's out there?
There's not really anything that's very effective at home. I mean, there's at-home gluten tests if you were, needing to eat a gluten-free diet. There's stuff like that I've seen good results from individuals. But to be able to test these analytes that we put within the gummies, it's very complex testing, right? Like we have to dissolve the gummy, extract whatever we're analyzing for, and then run it through an extraction and purification process even before getting on the instrument. Our instruments at our laboratory are, for example, anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 a piece. So like you can't do that at home. And so like there is a barrier, but at the same side of that, all these laboratories will accept samples from private consumers.
Interesting. So technically you could send something that you're
You could.
worried about to a lab. Like
Exactly.
technically. Interesting. Didn't even know that. Bet Chloe knew that, but
Daniel, what's your opinion on, certifications? Like, does that make a big difference whether something's like, for example, GMP certified?
Yeah, so a lot of products are CGMP, accredited and certified. First off, it's a standard to make sure a product that's able to be created and consistent and traceable. So that standard is fairly common within the marketplace. And so I don't want to say that's like the 100% deciding factor, right? Like part of it is obviously aligning with the company and learning a little bit about the company and trying the product. But at the end of the day, like what that GMP compliance requires is like we have to vet out our vendors. We have to vet out the ingredients, the raw ingredients that go inside the product. The manufacturing process that is done within the product is very well controlled, which means that it's done the same way every single time, same cook steps, same batch sizes, all the way down to the finished packaging and sending it out the door. Very call it controlled and rigid certification. But at the end of the day, like again, that's only one step in verifying that a product is good. The next step is, as an informed consumer, is, understanding what's in it, making sure that the reviews look good from everyone else that's trying it, and then trying it yourself. And I say that again because, we employ 210 people here in Dallas, and we are a CGMP site, and we put out a lot of product, and and it's very traceable and like consistent. But I've also been in a lot of CGMP sites that are not very, like, they shouldn't have passed an audit test. They should not be in operation, but they exist. So like just within the industry, like, there's a lot of cleaning up that needs to happen, but it's also a lot of just being an informed consumer.
Interesting. I love that. That's a huge reason why we started the show, this podcast in general. So, to help inform some of those types of things. Speaking of which, we already kind of went there, but let's dive deeper into the lab section here, and touch on some more of these things. Something that we see a lot when we interview, I'd say it's a lot in the supplement company, some supplement space, but it also in red light, all over the place, is something called the composition fallacy. So meaning, like, if you combine a bunch of stuff that has science behind it, that automatically means that the formula combining all of those ingredients is better or more effective. So I'm curious if you guys have done any research with your specific formulations in combined, not just individual research.
Yeah, so for Mojo in particular, and I think what you're hinting towards is the potential use of, say, clinical or preclinical work to be able to understand if a particular group of analytes has an effect, synergistic effect, larger than, if you were to consume them independently. And for Mojo itself, we've not gone through that sort of preclinical work, primarily because it is a capital constraint and there is large barriers to do that. If we're talking about early animal trials, you're talking $100,000. If you're talking early preclinical investigatory trial, you're talking $60,000 to $70,000 just to get it in people's hands and a questionnaire filled out. And so there are large barriers of entry, and you don't normally see that type of work within the dietary supplement space. Now, you do see it in the medical device space. You have to have it, right? But in the dietary supplement space, you don't. Beauty with Mojo is we're not choosing ingredients, call them, that are 100% functional. And what I mean by that is you take them and then you take them for a few months and you're not sure if they work, or you are sure that they work. And we don't have 100% those ingredients in the formula. It's a product that you take and you have instantaneous effects, right? Either you have energy or you don't, right? Like, or you take two and you have energy or you don't. And so, like, from an anecdotal standpoint and calling one person as a potential data point, you yourself can reflect and say, hey, is this helping me or not? And so, like, that's one thing that a lot of different use cases don't necessarily have. Same thing with sleep. Sleep is another one that you can take, and either you're going to fall asleep better or you're not, right? Like at the end of the day, and that's your deciding factor as a consumer. And so, interesting enough, within Mojo, we've not had to go down that route. And I'm not saying that it's not a good idea from a scientific standpoint to generate those data points, but the barriers of entry to do that and the ROI is very hard to recoup from a dietary supplement standpoint. It's fairly easy to recoup on the pharmaceutical medical device standpoint because it's your basis for having patentability,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
your valuation goes through the roof if you show
Yeah.
those things. But
Huge.
if we're pumping $100,000 in support of claims that we can support through publications and anecdotal evidence, it's hard to get a return on that in a dietary supplement.
Dude, we've got to fix that in this space in
Have to.
general, because it's so, we hear this, we don't ask these questions to like put someone on the spot. It's just where people are at. We're founders. We want to help people. And it's just like the system at the current moment is not built for this level of consumer data, or like, you can put your product in hundreds of thousands of people's hands. You could have a sample size of hundreds of thousands, but there's no mechanism yet to capture that data or test it or peer review it or publish it or validate any of that stuff. And I just, like, that needs to be created, I feel like, to help with this problem.
Yeah, it's just creating the system to make sure that the data's clean too, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's one of the largest barriers. There isn't just having the clinician there that's doing the analyses. It's making sure that the product is given to the person and them taking it and monitored is monitored in a correct way. So even when you talk about self-reported diaries of people taking a product and saying if it works for them or not, if it's not administered consistently across the entire sample size, then you have a lot of noise in your data. Right. And if you have a lot of noise in your data, does it stand up to the scientific rigor that you're trying to create? Right. And
Right.
so like it's hard. I've seen a couple of groups just go in on dietary supplement studies together. So for example, say you had a product and then you had friends that had 2 or 3 other products, you 4 or 5 throw money in together and they all get an observatory
Yes.
trial together. I've seen that happen. But it's newly developing for people to start doing that, at least here in the US.
Yeah, makes sense. I think that the other thing that I'm curious about is like your guys' product creation. Like, are there any controversial or hidden ingredients that people should know about or they might misunderstand or not understand in general? Some of the stuff you were talking about earlier, you're like a tapioca, whatever. Like some of those things sound wild to me, but maybe they're safe. Like, is there anything like that you all use?
Just broad overview of our product, right? We've got a mushroom stack in there. It's cordyceps sinensis, cordyceps militaris. Those are both linked towards energy, focus, mental clarity. We have lion's mane, which has shown quite good clinical indication that it helps with people with mood disorders as well as any neuropathy that may have occurred during their lifetime. Those are normally very high dosages, but lion's mane does support neuropathic pain and things like that. And then our more like mood and focus heavy ingredients are your traditional ginseng, which is in almost every energy drink at this point,
Mhm.
L-theanine, and a slow release caffeine, because caffeine plus L-theanine is a amazing combo to keep the edge off, but also it's a sustained release caffeine, so it's very slow releasing, so it's not too edgy. And then we layer on top of it a molecule called SAMe, as well as Mucuna pruins. Mucuna pruins is known for increasing L-dopa, which is a precursor to dopamine. So, what we like to tell people is that it gives you more enjoyment in the things that you do. It gives more enjoyment of walking in a park or reading or, doing X, Y, and Z. And SAMe it supports both dopamine and serotonin use within the brain. And so it just makes things like harmonize better. And then I threw ginger on top of it because for me, I like to have ginger in almost every product. It helps settle the stomach. And so in general, I like ginger in a lot of these stimulant-based products.
That's beautiful. Something I noticed in looking at the research for y'all's formulations and things is what you mentioned this a second ago is the dosages. Like lion's mane, for example, a lot of the research is with 3 grams, not 146 milligrams. So how do you what's your thought process on that? Why so much less than what is clinical? Is it? I have no idea. What's up with that?
Yeah, so part of it is also form factor. So we use a 10-to-1 extract within our products. It's about 10 times as strong as a dry herb blend of, say, lion's mane or cordyceps sinensis. And within the gummy space, we have to do that, right? We only have so much room that I can fit powder into the gummy. And when you see your gummies, they're quite packed with powder. They're very heavily dosed. And part of that is because the form factor, right? I've got a 2 or 2.5 gram gummy, and so there's only so much I can put powder in there for it to still be a gummy and not like a hard chew. And so we use stronger extracts is the only way we can combat that within this space.
So it might be less grams, but its strength could still be like higher or whatever.
Exactly. It's kind of like comparing like a shot of alcohol to a beer.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy. That makes so much sense. Something else I noticed, which is kind of wild, is in your guys' libido gummy, you mentioned kanna is in it, but when you look at the ingredients, it's not in the ingredients active or non-active. So is it named something different? Is it like, because I know some things have like what everybody calls it, nature's Xanax, which is kava, right? But like, what's up with that? Is that something that we just don't know yet?
No, it's inside the active ingredients. It's probably just the old packaging art that's still on our website. When we launched the libido SKU, we did it very quickly, and we used renders to put on our website, so that probably just didn't get swapped out in the render.
Got it. Okay, yeah, I was so confused. I was like, what the hell is this, and why is it not actually in the thing that's being sold? Well, could you explain what it is though? Because it seems like the it was so funny because it seems like it was like the title thing that was in this supplement, but I just couldn't find it. Like, what is it? And you can confirm it is actually in the gummy.
Yeah. So kanna is within our libido SKU. It is now one of our newly emerging top selling SKUs as well. People are loving it across the US. It's in, a couple hundred retail locations, I think 300 or 400 at this point. And it confirmed it is in the gummy. Kanna is a botanical. It's shown great use for anxiety and anxiolytic properties. And more interesting is right now there are a couple groups over in the UK that are investigating it for sexual dysfunctions. So in males, and they've raised a ton of money and capital pumping it into it. So that's more recent. That's in the past year or so. We launched this SKU 2 years ago. It's just analyte that I've always felt has been both interesting to consume, but it's just the botanical properties of it lends very well to it being a libido support. That's what kind of is.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to clear that up because I was just like, what the heck is going on here? I figured it might be something like that. The other one you guys have is sleep. You mentioned sleep. Sleep is something, like you mentioned, is like one of the biggest things that people struggle with. I work a lot with people after trauma and like in a mental health setting and like a therapy setting, and sleep is one of the number one things that is dysfunctional. Something that's interesting, right, is that you guys took the melatonin route. Not all sleep supplements do that. I have a specific stance with the background in brain science and melatonin, but I'm curious what your guys' thought is on why the melatonin route, why decide to add that in there?
Yeah, so the inclusion of melatonin was primarily around two things. Form factor, right? I mean, a lot of your alternatives to melatonin is like your magnesium glycinate, citrates, all of those is what people will use generally in dietary supplement. And those are very hard to include within a gummy. We do manufacture magnesium gummies, but they are fairly hard to include anything else besides the magnesium. And we wanted to put, mushroom and the other ingredients within the sleep product in there. And so part of it was creating space for the ingredients to allow an effect. Another is there's so much volume within the marketplace for melatonin gummies still. I know there's kind of, call it, clashing between pro melatonin and not pro melatonin. Tart cherry is one that people talk about, but it still contains melatonin in it, phytomelatonin, and no one talks about that part of it, right? It's part of getting into the sleep space, putting our foot down and saying, hey, this is a good alternative with mushrooms layered on top, because our goal is to put more mushrooms in people's hands and diets. And then maybe stepping back and saying, all right, well, here's a melatonin SKU and here's a non-melatonin SKU, and pick which one you want. But at the end of the day, within the sleep space, melatonin just dominates the space in terms of the amount of products consumed, especially within gummy.
Yeah, no kidding. Something that's outside of just does it mess up your natural melatonin? We don't have to get into that. I've been on that soapbox before, but the question I have is, it is in there, cool. Generally, it's considered, or I guess generally that you would suggest someone take it like 60 to 120 minutes ish before bed, whereas some of the other things that are inside the gummy are better 30 to 60 minutes before bed. Like, how do you? This seems like an impossible thing when you're trying to create a product that has these different like substances in there. How do you decide what to put in what, and how, especially when there's different times you should take things? Like, how do you think about that? It seems impossible.
Some of it is looking at the bioavailability of some of these analytes. Right? So for example, for our energy product, that was one of the first things when trying to mimic a microdosage, was looking at what that effect looks like. And that was first the initial, call it relaxation, your brain starting to go into that flow state, starting to get enjoyment in what you're doing. Then you get hit with a heightened state of stimulation, followed by long terms of creativity. And so when taking that sort of idea and layering upon analytes that could attribute it, that's how I ended up with Mucuna pruins and Sammy, right? Like, they're very fast acting. They both affect dopamine and serotonin systems, act within 30 minutes. Then you go into a sustained caffeine that acts, within, I think it takes like 30 to 45 minutes for the outer wall, that caffeine to start to break down. And then you're talking about a 8 to 12 hour of sustained energy within that. So it's part like just first off digging into the bioavailability of these analytes and just layering those on top of each other. Obviously, everyone's body's different. And then if you consume on an empty stomach or full stomach or even coffee before, going to completely change the pharmacokinetics of all these analytes. But at the end of the day, we work on the basis of numbers and large numbers, and those large numbers tell us what the potential bioavailabilities are, and we work backwards from those.
Could you, I'm just going to pretend you're ChatGPT right now, and I'm going to ask you to explain bioavailability and pharmacokinetics like I'm a fifth grader, because I don't know that many of our audience would exactly know what those are. You and Chloe might, as engineers, but be as if I said oleurodendrocyte and hoped everyone knew what that glial cell was in the brain, but they wouldn't
Okay.
know.
So, assuming that if someone had no basis in science, the easiest way to probably explain bioavailability is the amount of time first off, how well a molecule dissolves within a system, regardless if you consume it orally or if you let it dissolve under your tongue, and then how quickly it is taken up into the bloodstream and in effect is it exhibited. A good indicator, one that everyone will know, is alcohol, for example. Alcohol, you take a shot of alcohol within 5 minutes, it is already passing through blood-brain barrier, you're getting a heightened mood, a heightened sense of relaxation. It has a very high amount of bioavailability, right? Almost 100%. Same thing with caffeine. Caffeine's like 90-95% bioavailable, and it happens to be absorbed very, very quickly. So bioavailability is a good way of explaining how a particular molecule is able to be dissolved, consumed, and then exhibit it. In our case, exhibiting an effect. In this case, it's a psychotropic effect. But the other side of that is there's molecules that are not very bioavailable. Right? A lot of things that are laden with oil don't absorb very well within the body. A lot of times, for example, when people smoke cannabis, like they smoke it because it absorbs so quickly, it's instantaneous, right? As opposed to consuming it where you're talking about 60 to 90 minutes because it's a very oil heavy and very long molecule. In terms of pharmacokinetics, that is the analysis of how a particular analyte actually breaks down, exhibits an effect, and is excreted from the body. And so, every molecule that you consume is broken down by different enzymes and different processes within the body that essentially create what's called a half-life. How long does it take to get rid of about 50% of that molecule out of the body? And so, PK, pharmacokinetic studies, is essentially that, right? Analyzing how long it takes for something to be absorbed and then excreted from the body. I think that's the surface level I can get the best.
Beautiful. I think that'll help a lot of people. I appreciate you enlightening the audience there a little bit. What about side effects? Like, are there any downsides, like side effects, anything like that for any of the products y'all have up?
The biggest one that I can call out is on our extra strength and Mojo regular strength. The inclusion of SAMe has shown some contradictions within people that are on SSRIs for mood disorders. And so that's one that I tell people that, hey, they need to consult their physician, make sure it's okay for you to consume these products. You know the medication you're on more than I know the medication that you're on. And so that's one that there has been shown some interactions that are potentially negative, primarily around serotonin, right? All the others are fairly safe to consume. I tell people, hey, monitor your caffeine content, right? But we're talking about 45 milligrams inside of our extra strength, so that's not very strong in the Western world, right? A lot of people are consuming energy drinks with 200 milligrams plus. So it's not really that much in terms of most people's consumption. But that's really it. That's the one that I normally like to call out people to just watch your medications more than I do.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel you on the stimulant. I'm like Peter. I'm not very strong with the caffeine. I feel like Chloe could take probably 5,000 milligrams of caffeine to the dome, but I am not the same way.
I'm trying to be better.
You're doing great. You're doing great. It's a tough one. Let's move into the skeptical buyer section, or the interrogation, as we like to call it, where we get to ask some questions from the audience and things like that. Chloe, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, what's the biggest criticism or skepticism you get from people that hesitate to buy Mojo?
I mean, hesitate to buy it. I would say I would give one where it's, for a small amount of the population, maybe like you, Chloe, they have very high tolerance. And so that's one of the reasons why we've created, different strengths. So we've got the regular strength of the various flavors, the extra strength, and then the max strength. But for people with very high tolerance to stimulants, if they're buying regular strength, they're not going to feel the kind of energetic forward nature of the product. So we would have some criticisms around that, but that's why we built out these different strength levels where we could recommend people different things. Other complaints, I'd say the max strength, because it's so strong, it has its own flavor property that comes through. It definitely has a bite. And so if you're taking this thinking it's going to be like a mildly gummy, it's not. It's strong, it's punchy. It also, we purposely put it with kind of the yuzu lime to have that kind of tart nature to it. Possibly some people don't like that kind of the taste. Those are the couple of things.
That's an interesting thing. Like, how does what you, Daniel, want to put into this 2 to 3 grams fit with what you, Peter, are trying to sell to people? How do you square that? How do you figure that out? What's your process?
Yeah, I mean, early on we decided pretty well, like we wanted this to work. Like, I know that sounds obvious from a supplement standpoint, but we really wanted it to both have a short-term physiological impact that people definitely felt, and these long-term compounding benefits. Now, most supplements kind of have this faith-based kind of take it for a long time and it's gonna improve whatever it is. So we wanted those compounding benefits. We really wanted this, like, you take it, you know it. And to Daniel's point, the same with sleep, like you're gonna know if you had a better sleep or not the next day. So all of our products kind of follow that rhythm. So, of course, with businesses, there's always this like, we want to make the margins better and all of that type of stuff. But it's all within reason for us because we're committed to people being able to feel the benefits of this product, both from a, let's call it a business perspective. We want, people to stick around. We want people to subscribe. And for that to happen, it has to work. But also just Daniel and I both use the product. We're both avid supplement users and it needs to work for us as well. It's a constant like give and take of business, stuff. But mostly we think about like what's going to work. How do we package this up so it both works and doesn't taste awful? That was the big thing early on, because the amount of bioactives, you had to be very, you had to play around with the flavors a lot. So that was, a big part of our experimentation early on. So tastes good and it works. But outside of that, we're constantly thinking about ways to optimize it.
I'm really curious, what was the decision behind going gummy versus encapsulation or chocolate or something else?
We wanted to make, early on, the form factor was a big topic of conversation. I mean, one of the things we put a stake in the ground very early on was, whilst we understand why mushroom coffee was the kind of early form factor, it's, inserting them into a ritual that people already have. And so there's not something outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the first products that, I tried in the functional mushroom space. And so I think it's interesting, but we also thought, there's plenty of mushroom coffees out there, so we're not going to do the kind of mushroom coffee tea thing. And personally, my background is Sicilian, and I love coffee, and putting mushrooms in coffee is just sacrilege. I don't like. I've tried them all.
Personal vendetta.
Yeah, my ancestors would not appreciate it. Now there are some that are, I prefer than others. I kind of like the midday chai type kind of feeling of some of the brands, but you'll know which one if you've tried it. But for the most part, I like coffee. I like it by itself. I like it as its own ritual. And we thought early on that there was enough coffees and there are enough teas. Now, whether we were right on that is TBD. Like, we've seen plenty of other brands launch since 2020 that are doing really well in the coffee space. So there was probably a lot of room for market share, but whatever. That was our stake in the ground early on. We wanted to make something that was novel in the mushroom space and convenient and tasty and easy on the go, that didn't require mixing. We didn't want people to have to mix their own powder. And equally, capsules, things like that, they're not that accessible to the mass market. And one of the things that we wanted to do with Mojo is just make this super mainstream, super accessible to get these things into people's diet. And so gummies were the fastest and still are the fastest growing, type of supplement form factor in the supplement space. And so it's a fast growing space. Nobody had really done the mushroom gummy thing when we launched. Like, they exist now, obviously, in more numbers. And we wanted to make a form factor that was a bit different to the coffees and teas out there. So that was where the impetus came from.
Interesting. What something that we talk about a lot with companies too is marketing versus science, and it's beautiful that we have both of you guys on here for this. What is your guys's? There's we look at claims a lot, left increased focus, energy, mood, reduced brain fog. Some of these like claims that you make on in marketing. What is your guys's mental model, or how do you guys between each other decide this is something that makes it into our marketing because there is enough research around individual ingredients, or how do you guys think about those things, the research versus marketing and what gets out there?
I've relied wholly on Daniel for what we can credibly claim in our marketing. Obviously, there's legal considerations as well, so what we can and can't say. But from a credibility standpoint, really, it's about the product for us. I mean, you can overclaim legally. The problem there is our business is based on, LTV and subscription. So you make those claims, people try, it doesn't have the impact. You're not going to get a repeat customer. And so now you probably could if you're more of a supplement that's just like, hey, take this for 3 months and you're gonna, but ours, like we said, whether it works or not. And so overclaiming may work for the short sale, but it doesn't work for the LTV, the repeat customer. So there's always a balance there.
What's your mental model, Daniel?
And I think with every product, we've gone into it already knowing what we're going to market, like our use case, what our target wording is, like how are we going to first launch the product. And then we're really receptive around what people are saying, right? So if someone comes in and says, hey, I really like using this before I go to the gym, we didn't originally think of it as a gym product, right? But then suddenly, like we're getting more and more response, more and more effect size from people saying, oh, I'm taking it to go to the gym. So, hey, let's start doubling down on that on marketing budget. So like, I think going into it, we always have a use case and like our intended marketing buzz that we want to generate, but then we're really receptive on what we're hearing from our consumer and, doubling down on that sort of targeting.
Yeah,
Got it.
like for example, I mean, one of the platforms that we've been quite successful on is TikTok and TikTok Shop. And a lot of the marketing there is not directed from the brand. Like obviously we have our brand messages, but a lot of the marketing is you send a sample, they try it, they talk about the product. And so you get to see like your product in a while and what people wanting to talk about. And then, you can evolve from there. But we never really leaned into the ADHD stuff early on. Like that wasn't really like we knew this would help focus, and Daniel obviously built this as a kind of, the very early on was the Adderall kind of thing, but the ADHD kind of crowd really discovered this and started talking about this by themselves. And then, there was a kind of snowball effect, certainly on TikTok, of more people with ADHD taking it and more people talking about it from that frame of reference. It wasn't really us that said any of that or claimed any of that stuff. So it has a kind of a natural life of its own on a platform like TikTok.
Something y'all do play into pretty heavily that I squint my eyes at, understanding serotonin receptors, is the Mojo mimics the benefits of a microdose, but completely legally. So I'm curious your guys' perspective on pushing so hard on that when, at least from my look of the ingredients, they do absolutely affect completely different systems, like antioxidants and like ATP on one side and serotonin system on another. What's your guys' thought on that? Because that is like the claim that I feel like could be most misunderstood, probably.
Yeah, so I can probably paint a little bit of clarity around that. Is kind of similar to what I was saying earlier in the podcast, is a lot of substances, both botanicals and non-synthetic substances that have psychotropic and psychedelic effects on the very early dosage ends of those have, call it a light effect. And that light effect is more like a stimulant, right? Microdosage is very sub-perceptual. You're not seeing things change in the room. You're not seeing colors. Like it's very sub-perceptual, and that's why people tie it so closely to entering into flow state, is it because you feel that something's there, but you're not quite sure what it is. And so that early section of the dosage curve on mushrooms is what we had originally targeted with Gwella, primarily because we knew that we could get very close to it with dietary supplements, right? Through modulating mood and modulating focus. And so although it does act on different receptor sites, right? We're not on the H2A receptors, and we're not creating any sort of psychedelic effects. We are creating a psychotropic effect, and the psychotropic effect being stimulation, mental clarity, and focus. And those are all the things that people claim when they take microdosages, is those things, and of course heightened mood. And so that's one of the reasons we lean so far into that, is because that was our initial goal, right? Our initial goal, again, was to put more mushrooms in people's hands and bodies.
I would say as
Got
well,
it.
yeah, that was the initial goal, and we thought it was a really interesting take. We saw this kind of growing interest in microdosing, the benefits, but there was always these pockets of use cases that people talked about, and those pockets of use cases were what we were trying to mimic, to Daniel's point, whether it's kind of mood modulation, etc. Over time, we've leaned less on the kind of microdose messaging because it's been less relevant, I would say, to the consumer base. And also, let's say platforms aren't that accepting of that type of language. And so if anything, it's been a bit more of a hindrance than a benefit for us.
That's interesting. Got it. So it's more about the subjective felt experience that either can generate, even if through different pathways, essentially. That's more what it's about.
That's correct. Kind of like you have in the marketplace a whole lot of alcohol-free alternatives. Don't have
Yeah,
alcohol, but they claim very similar relaxative effects. Very, very similar to that sort of claims and messaging.
got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. All right, y'all made it out of the interrogation. Good work.
We survived.
Hopefully it wasn't too rough on you. We're generally pretty friendly. Now we get to talk about the future, which is Chloe and I's favorite and generally our audience's favorite too. So you want to start us off, Chloe?
Yeah. What's your roadmap looking like for start us off with maybe the next year and then in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, so we have 6 products that we're going to be launching throughout. Initially we said we're going to launch them all this year. We'll see if that's really on Daniel.
No pressure.
But the next one to launch is going to be something focused on more beauty, hair, skin, nails type stuff. Has always been the top request from our community. We've got a bunch of other cool use cases. I mean, one that I've always been really interested in, and I personally use a lot, is hangover prevention products, mostly because, I like to drink on the weekends. And even if I'm not like a binge drinker anymore, but I noticed that even with a couple of glasses of wine or a few beers, the next day is much more difficult for me, probably partially my age. I've got 3 kids that wake me up early. So there's all of these factors. But even though I'm just having one glass of wine, I like to take a hangover product with prickly pear or electrolytes or DHM, things like that. And so we've been working on what that looks like from a
Wow.
Mojo standpoint, and how can we really put in the level of bioactives required, and what the staging is like. Take one before drinking, during, after, morning after, whatever it is. So I'm personally really excited about that. And then we have five other ones that we'll be launching. So really, ultimately, Mojo is going to be this, use case targeted product company where we've made interesting formulations that target these things. And that's, quite often is based on what the community gives our feedback, but also like the hangover one, things that we're personally interested in solving with better for you products. And then, we've been mostly a D2C, e-com brand to date. We've had some retail action. We're in around 600 stores across the US. We've got a really great partnership now with Urban Outfitters across a lot of their stores. And we've got another really big partnership in the works with a big mainstream, you would think of it more of like a supplement and health store across North America. So we're pulling into those kind of, big retailers for mainstream distribution. Daniel and I have also always been really interested in gas stations, convenience stores in New York. We're in a lot of bodegas, but I've always thought of Mojo as this perfect product for, paying for your gas. It's at the, instead of like a 5-hour energy, you see a Mojo there, and you can grab that, and it's kind of the better for you version of that for any demographics, like, truckers or just people driving, or just the sheer kind of novelty of it at the cashier. So, exploring those retail relationships, expanding out the use cases. We're also looking to start expanding out more, geography wise, location wise. So we're getting a lot of sales through our partners in Europe and the UK. And so probably making that a little bit more official, supplies on the ground, that kind of stuff there.
Amazing. I
Awesome.
love that. Sounds like a fun future. What about like AI, data-driven health? Like there's new consumer trends coming all the time. Where do you see the wellness industry headed in general, Daniel?
I think one of the most interesting sectors within AI is, everyone being able to have a personal, call it AI coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
An AI module that's able to both interact with, your bracelets that monitor your breathing rate and your heart rate, but also be able to go in and monitor like your med charts and everything else and just get a very clear understanding of where you are within your day and across months. One of the things that we miss within healthcare is that when we go to a doctor, sometimes we're only going once a year, right, for a checkup. And I don't believe that that's a good enough cadence for us as we age. And maybe if we were going every month, every 2 months, like a lot of health issues and a lot of nutrient deficiencies and things like that can be caught a lot early on, which we think about it when we're this age, like, yeah, our body can probably withstand a lot of things, but we pay for it on the long span of our life. We take years off of our life, enjoyable years. We may live longer, but we may not enjoy those years, right? And so I think one of the most interesting plugins for AI is going to be around something that is able to analyze all that data, track you, maybe tell you when to go to a doctor or send in a urine analysis or spit analysis or something like that to see if you're deficit in anything, and then give you recommendations, and those recommendations will allow you to have a healthier life, but also a longer life. We're at an age in humanity where we live very long times, but the tail ends of our life are not that enjoyable from what I've seen. And so if you can add additional life expectancy, but also satisfaction within those years, then I think that's leaps and bounds ahead of where we are right now.
Could not agree more. I love that. That's like my personal mission to create something like that, like a human AI operating system. So we also talked with the founder of Gyroscope, which is an interesting app that's trying to do a lot of what you're describing right now. Whoop is on a mission to do some of that stuff. And then they just released Biological Age in their new Whoop band, which is crazy. And then Mavi, who connected us. Like I know part of Frank's longer term vision is to do things like that as well. So it's
I would,
interesting.
I would personally love to see. I mean, I have a kind of aura ring and I track that stuff. One of the things I've always not disliked about it, but it's like a what next problem with a lot of the trackables now. It's like, okay, I slept like shit last night. What next? Or I do this. What next? And those kind of recommendations, I think, could be improved upon. But also plugging to Daniel's point, like the real world. So, okay, this is showing up here. Maybe you should get XYZ scan that ports over to your doctor, and just like connecting the loop a little bit more. And
Mm,
certainly here in Canada as well, I think we have unique challenges with socialized medicine. You have to really fight and advocate for
Mhm.
getting access to certain technology or certain scans and things like that. It's quite scarce. You're not going to give it out to everybody. And so AI can kind of enable a lot of that stuff on a cheaper level. Because frankly, all you get when you go to a doctor, here, for your checkup, quick checkup, everything's cool. Or maybe if everything's not cool, it's probably going to be all right. Like the level of depth that family doctors go into is not, it just doesn't cut it anymore. And, in the US, you have things like pre-novo scans and things like that. Like imagine, personal wearables that then plug into the ability to get these more advanced scans or diagnostics with then arming, a doctor. But frankly, I see like AI not replacing the doctor, but being able to crunch a lot of this data and empowering you to make decisions and then having doctor as oversight. So I'm just looking forward to being a lot more empowered with usable data.
yeah, Jedi still they have lightsabers, but you still need a Jedi to wield the lightsabers. Kind of always the way that I've thought about it a little bit. And we have the Force, right? Like there's this human energy in all of us, I believe. So it's I love that. I guess the goal for you guys then is to be one of those suggestions by these AIs in the future, because what we're describing will happen inevitably. Like
Mhm.
there's just no way it does not happen. And so then it's like, okay, how do you position Gwella and Mojo as what they're suggesting? Have you guys thought about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think even outside of say trackables and something like that, it's going to be interesting because recommendation engines are usually somewhat biased through
Mhm.
corporate partnerships. So, you'll get a recommendation that these are the people that may not be the best, but they've paid to be visible. And so
Mhm.
even with the chat GPTs of the world and things like that. I mean, they're doing really interesting things where you'll probably be able to very soon buy through a Shopify integration through chat GPT on products and, somewhat making websites a little bit more obsolete or that experience. But, that's going to require some level of LLM optimization and things like that. And in which case, again, it's going to be the people that are the best at that optimization. But hopefully there's signals that are a little less bias. Like early on, SEO was very easy to manipulate. I think this is going to be a lot more sophisticated based on, multi-directional facet, different reviews and this and this and this, and can come together to make better recommendations. But TBD. I do worry that there's going to be a lot of corporate capture on any of these kind of engines.
Yeah, we need to come together. It's got to come from the bottom up, baby. I love that. Ask the moonshot question, Chloe. I love that you added this one, and I love this question that you added in here.
We'll get Peter to answer this one first. If you had unlimited resources tomorrow, what idea would you pursue in wellness?
I would build Theranos that actually works. I think that's actually true, though. I think that's actually true. Like some form of diagnostic that could find everything from the one drop.
That would be amazing. What about you, Daniel? Unlimited resources. What's your moonshot?
What's the moonshot? Does that have to stay in dietary supplement or no?
No.
Could be anything.
Okay. I mean, I think, long-term goals is for me to always get back into research and science. So if I had unlimited resources and I could position that to look at therapy for individuals that are struggling with mood disorders or alcohol addictions or things like that, I think that would be an exceptional goal, right? One life saved is worth a lifetime of work. But on the other side of that, I think energy is a big thing that we need to look at within the US specifically. And so, sustainable energy, I don't think solar, I don't think, wind, I don't think all of that is the best case. But, the more I look at energy, the only logical explanation is going and expanding on nuclear, but how you do that in a way that is both ethical and not, for lack of better words, going to blow up in our face. And so I think we are in an energy organism, and as computers, AI, everything else starts consuming more, where is it coming from? And so if I could help the people and I could help the planet, those are the two things I'd like to do.
Dude,
Unlimited resources.
People don't realize
so
that.
like those are all very expensive things.
Absolutely. It's interesting too. People don't realize how lacking of electrons we are right now. And it's kind of scary. It takes 10, 20 years to make a nuclear power plant. It takes 5, 10 years to do solar stuff. And it's just, there's a lot of big issues facing us. Sometimes it feels overwhelming, but I'm optimistic. I think I think we'll figure it out. We have a way of doing that, so. All right, let's move into the lightning lab. This is just a quick section that we do at the end. The goal here is to answer in a word, a sentence, or a story, and we'll give both of you one question. So one gets the answer, one doesn't. The first one is, what's the number one health and wellness myth you'd like to bust? Who wants to take it?
That seems like a Daniel question. What's your pet peeve, Daniel?
Our biggest myth in wellness.
One of the things that we see a lot of, and maybe Daniel, you can expand on this, is overclaiming the importance of, as a kind of marketing thing in the mushroom world, the over importance of fruiting bodies versus mycelium. I think that's an interesting area, and that we're really going after bioactives and this kind of compounding effect of both. So ultimately we use both, but we see a lot of brands obviously overclaiming the importance of just using fruiting body. I don't know whether that's one you want to talk about, Daniel.
Dude, definitely double tap on that, Daniel, please. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, so if I had to say it in, well, if that's 2 words, like analyte focus is the 2 words, but just to expand on that, is there, especially when we got started in this field in 2020, there was a just growing amount of PR and companies that were saying that Fruity Body is the most premium product that you can, consume from a mushroom. And that's actually taking the mushroom and allowing it to fruit, which is creating the actual mushroom that we're used to seeing. Harvesting only that, grinding it up, and then turning that into the finished product. Those are also the lowest yields in terms of not using the full mushroom and the substrate and the mycelium. And it's really kind of a myth, because the most important thing is going after the analyte of interest. For example, cordyceps, right? Like your cordyceptin, your adenosine are very interesting molecules to pursue. Those aren't always just most prevalent within the fruity body. Same thing with lion's mane. right? For a long time, people were like, this is only Fruity Body Lion's main product, and it's the best. That's not true, right? It really depends on what analyte you're going after and then in what quantity. For example, like Lion's Mane, Fruity Body versus Mycelium, very good to use one-to-one extracts. You get just a very broad spectrum of analytes that have the best effects. And then one step further into that, I did a 8-month stint in Portugal growing mushrooms within bioreactors for key analytes. And at that point, there's no fruity body. We're growing in fermentation tanks and we're using mycelium to create those products, and then create them into a final concentrate. And so at that point, like then the argument doesn't exist because there is no fruity body, right? And so like that's kind of I don't want to say gray mark within the space, but it's nowadays it's less talked about. But a lot of people that were laying the groundwork were saying, hey, fruity bodies is the only thing you have to consume. And I think some of it was also misnomer because what some companies were doing was they were taking the fruity body, the mycelium, and all the substrate, which is normally oats and barley and stuff like that, or rice, and they were grinding it all together, thus diluting the extract. And therefore, that was creating a less superior product, as opposed to taking the fruity bodies, pulling and filtering out the substrate, and then combining the two back together.
Got it. Wow, that's wild. Could you define analyte for us as well?
Yeah, I can. Analyte is just like a molecule that you're interested in, right? So, for example, the cordyceps. Cordyceptin is a molecule that's very targeted towards like energy and focus that's found in Cordyceps sinensis, a little bit of militaris. It's just the molecule you're looking for. It's you're active.
Beautiful. Love that. All right, cool. I like that. All right, next up, Chloe.
All right. What is one question that you wished people would ask you more?
I mean, I love it when my kids ask me what my favorite dinosaur is. So I used to love,
Nice.
yeah, it's the Carnotaurus for anybody that wonders. Nobody asks that anymore,
Well, you got to share it today, Peter. I'm glad for that. What about you, Daniel? What's something you wish more people asked you?
I wish more people asked me. I go to the other side, wish people asked me less.
Sure.
Why not?
Perfect.
Let's flip it around.
How's your day? Like that's for me that's just like as weird as that sounds, like people asking how's your day, but it's not very engaging as terms of generating like actual care and connection. And again, think back to peaks and valleys of being an entrepreneur. Most days are just stress, right? Like I said, I have 210 employees that report to me. And so like most days are very hard and I do it for the people and I do it to create. And so like for me, like sometimes I don't want to reflect on how my day is. Right? That's just me.
Interesting. It's so crazy. I say this every time, Chloe, but we have male founders on, the number of them that do want us to ask, or the question they say is, you flipped it, but what they would usually say is, I want people to ask me how I am doing and actually care. Your perspective is, don't ask me how I'm doing. I'm struggling. Leave me alone. I don't want to
Don't
think
even
about
want to
it.
think about it. Like ask me next week.
I think both of those perspectives speak to something inside of us dudes at times, though. I feel that.
I think that is, yeah, thinking about like just riffing on what Daniel said. I mean, I probably put myself in the same camp, even with like, I notice with my wife, she cannot wait to talk about her day, etc., and reciprocates asking about my day. But at the end of the day, I would rather decompress and not think about the day. You know what I mean? And always an interesting dichotomy, I think, that probably switches between males and female and the amount of which you want to talk about that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I've seen it male, female, like there's so many different variety in what people prefer and stuff. So, I mean, I prefer someone to ask me, even though it's uncomfortable, I would want to be asked, how are you doing? And I actually sit, listen, and care. So I think it's interesting, but
I
I
think that's
digress.
kind of the most important part is sometimes people ask and you don't have the time to really like they're not asking because you're going to sit down and conversate for 30 minutes. It's as like an opener.
Like,
And
do
so
you
in
Yeah.
that brief glimpse of self-reflection, you're like, I can't even take you through my day right now in this
Yeah.
1 minute,
That makes sense. I
right?
feel that.
And
Yeah.
then, I feel like those are hard questions to ask, and those are the ones that you have to intentionally ask in certain times. So just like if you ask someone, hey, are you happy? Right? That's a very hard question to ask for people to self-reflect. And there's kind of a time and place for those sort of things.
Right. Yeah. Things like that are hard. 'Cause happiness, in my opinion, is a verb, not a noun. It's not something you possess. It's something you do.
Amen.
It's yeah, that's a very good and solid point. I like that. All right, final question here. ladies and gentlemen. We ask every person on the pod, all the founders, to leave a question for the next one. So Barry, our boy Barry over at Energy Lounger, love that dude, asked the two of you, without knowing who you were going to be, how are you going to enhance humanity, and why do you think you'll do it differently than what exists today?
Is that for both of us to answer?
Yeah.
How will we enhance humanity? So just from a personal level, like, part of my entire life and my entire mission is to just dive headfirst into work and helping humanity through the things that I create. I spoke to one of my staff the other day, and they were like, why are you working so much? Why are you here 15 hours, 6, 7 days a week, just putting the time and effort in? And for me, it's not, it's the act of the creation. I think us as humans, the biggest thing that we can bring into the world is the things that our hands create, right? Painters paint, and some people form companies, some people make gummies, but like what we have to do is understand what is our lane and what is our creation. And for me, it's, research, creating products, and then hopefully helping humanity through those. I look a lot at effect size, and effect size meaning, how many people are consuming the products that I touch in some way or manner. Here in the US, almost every major retail location has a product that I've touched in some way. If you go into Walmart, you go into a Whole Foods, you go into a Sprouts, you go into a Target, there's just a product on almost every shelf that we've touched as a company. And so, for me, like, the biggest thing is effect size. Dietary supplement is one thing, but then going on, I'm still fairly young, I think. And so going on to future pathways forward, it's going dietary supplement, pharma, and tech, and then how to actually expand within those fields and have an impact and take everything I've learned across the way forward. Part of the reason I take on new projects is to meet founders and innovators and people like yourself and Peter that I want to work with when the cards are against us and we look at, a major global issue. I've got people I can call in. I can say, hey, like, Peter, what do you think about this? Or Cody, what do you think about this here? You want to be involved in it? So, like, at the end of the day, like, my goal is just to keep expanding and then have some sort of influence for both myself and the future generations.
About you, Peter.
And obviously that, like, the company's Mojo things, that's a vehicle for touching kind of the one-to-many and making products that help people's lives. But personally, I read this thing about how kind of there's this split between, typically liberals care about helping in the abstract as many people as possible. And then the converse is like more conservatively libertarian type people tend to stay localized and have tangible impacts on local community. And I've always thought of myself much more of like on that side of things. And so, whilst I think there's big existential questions, really my focus is on, my local community, myself, my kids, and then these kind of concentric rings out of there. So, can I be the best dad to my kids, the best husband to my wife? Can I help out at our local school? Things like that. And can I help the person down the street? And then ultimately, I think those kind of things will spread out. But I really try and not think too much about the abstract, because I think that's where you start spinning tires and spinning wheels.
Interesting. I like that. Something I think about is me, you, we, us. I just think about it all the time. You got to build awareness of yourself. You got to build awareness of others. You got to figure out how we all work together and then how all of us work together. So having impact on all of those levels, whether it's like doing me and you and then it expands to we and us, or focusing on we and us and it boils down to me and you. So it's you can go up and down that chain and attack at different levels. So I think that's cool. All right, what's the question y'all want to leave? What do you want to leave for our next guest?
Let's both say one, and then you choose which one you like best. Does that work?
Sure. We'll use both.
Okay. Mine would be kind of a probably two-part question. And it's one, if you reflect on your life and your career up to this point, what is one thing that you feel you would want to speak into existence to give people advice around the world based on your experience? And the second part of that is, if you were to give your future self a set of advice, what would it be? And, I think that those reflections are so important for us to give our future self advice based on where we're standing that we forget to do it.
I love that. Before we get to Peter, we always ask the question back to the person. So
I didn't know that.
If you reflect on your career and life so far, what advice would you give, and what advice would you give to your future self?
Past self, I would say I I really regret not taking more time to speak with family through some hard conversations. My mother passed away due to alcoholism, and I wish I had sat down and spoke to her a bit more about it growing up. And so I think it's really important for us to first off speak with our families and, actually work through some of the harder times and verbalize them when you can. I think that's really important. And then to my future self, I want to always keep the end goal clear, since my work is a lot of my life, is to know at what point is the point of which I can delegate tasks and take a step back. I reflect on, for example, my father worked with Sam Walton for a very long time. My family was with Walmart. And what he said on his deathbed is, I blew it. And he said it because although he built the largest company in the world late in life, he did not spend time with his friends and family. And that was because he lacked the ability to step back and give over control. And so I think we as entrepreneurs have to understand what points we can delegate, but also at what point can we step back from our works and reallocate our times to spend time with the more important parts of our life towards the mid to end parts of our life. Similar to what Peter said, right? Like he's very focused on his community, his family, where he can have effect size. And, as you start having a family, like that becomes more and more important.
Beautiful. I feel like it's the plight of humanity to, some people focus on their wealth and their relationships, and their health falls, and they're like, crap, and they regret it. Some people focus on their health, and their wealth and relationships suffer, or like, and it just seems like this race that we're all in to try and balance those things. So that's good advice to give your future self here. Peter, what do you got? You shaking your head at something? What do you got?
No, Jenny was just asking me if I've had lunch yet, so I was like, definitely not. Make me something.
Got it. Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. I was like, oh, okay, let's talk about this. All right. What's the question you want to leave? And then we're going to ask it back to you.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm always really interested in a couple of things. I mean, Daniel's done the ultra profound route, so I feel like I'll go for something more on the nose. Like, I'm really interested in what people read and the impact it had. And I'm just because went to school for music. Music has always been, I think music just like, it's just this understood thing between us all, a different kind of language. And it's one of the few things that can immediately like just drive something deeper in you, give you goosebumps. So I guess that would be one question, is like, what song still gives you goosebumps or does give you goosebumps? And then
Nice.
what book had the biggest impact on you? I mean, I had a few, but it's cliche, but when I was like 14, I wasn't really an avid reader when I was really young, like my sister was, but my mum gave me this old version of The Hobbit that my auntie had. And I read that, and then I just became completely obsessed with the universe. And then, read all of Lord of the Rings and all of the following things. To me, that was
Nice.
like so important because it actually got me into reading and these kind of stories, but also it was like a first subliminal grounding in real, like tangible philosophy and values and redemption and good and evil and things like that. So it just had a huge impact on me.
What about the goosebumps? What song still gives you goosebumps?
I feel like I'm very easy to get goosebumps, honestly. Like the other day, I mean, I've always been into all sorts of music, everything from like, you know, heavier metal to, jazz, electronica. But, the other day I was listening to a song that my 4-year-old son really likes called 7 Years Old, I think it is.
Lucas Graham.
Yeah. And like that's not necessarily a song that I would want to talk about from a credibility standpoint. It's a bit of a cheesy pop song. But just listening to it and now being a parent and the progression through the song was, gave me goosebumps.
I like this question. Daniel, what about you? What's a song that gave you goosebumps? Still gives you goosebumps?
See, like I don't know if any of those songs anyone would know, but there's an artist called Trevor Hall that I swear I've seen in concert a half dozen times. More like kind of folk indie music. But when I first discovered that artist, it was kind of a period where I was really needing to like settle and get inner peace. And like any of his discography basically takes me back to kind of those zones. Just allows me to just like really debug, for lack of better words, like just all the clutter that's builds up over a day, like allows me to kind of like relax. And so really like anything in any of his albums really.
Nice. What about you, Chloe?
I have this like one song that I love listening to when I'm like having a bad day, and it's called Alive by Sia. And she just like hits these insane notes, and it gives me goosebumps, and always makes me feel better and motivated.
Damn. Dude, mine's High Hopes by Panic at the Disco. That one gets me every time. Just such a
Nice.
great story and song. And the music video is even
Yeah.
crazier. Like that one gets me every time. That's a great one.
I was just listening to his live show yesterday.
Dude,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah.
I love to
You're
hear that.
playing in
Well,
Vegas in October, just so you know.
okay. That's near my birthday. Maybe I'll go for my birthday. That'd be a fun time. Well, thank you so much, guys, for hopping on here. This double feature. I think it was our first one, but an awesome one. So appreciate you guys hopping on. Is there any place you'd like to direct people or send people as we wrap up here?
Just mojo.shop. You can check out the products, and if you want some psychedelic education, then gwellamushrooms.com. But you can, if any of the products sounded interesting, you can grab some at mojo.shop, and there's always some kind of promo or discount code available on the website. So
Yeah, if anyone has questions for us, we both have LinkedIn's. We're both pretty public. They can
don't send them to
reach out as
LinkedIn.
needed.
Deal. Got it. We'll put that stuff in the description, and we really appreciate it. That's it's been a great conversation. That's it for here, but our viewers know that Chloe and I still have the lab results section that we'll jump on here, so stick around after we say bye to Peter and Daniel. And as always, thank you for showing up. Have a great one. Peace.
Thank you. Thank you.
Woo! All right. We needed some mojo for that conversation. That was a long one, but it was good. I think we had a great conversation. This is the lab results section, as everybody knows, so we kind of break down what we really think. Any thoughts off the top of your head, Chloe?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually personally tried the product, so I can speak to it. And I liked it. I found it was like, actually for Gummy, like quite stimulating. You did notice a difference. I have ADHD, and so I've always appreciated that they put mucuna pruriens, which was mentioned in the podcast, that it's a precursor to L-DOPA and dopamine, and it does make a difference in focus and energy levels. So I do like the product. They are using science-backed ingredients. As was said in the podcast, there are some products in there that you have to be a little bit careful about for contraindications like SAMe, melatonin. And so it's just good to be aware and make sure that, you're not taking any medication that would, cause any damage to take with the gummies.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Oh, that was cool. I think it's the first time we've had a double feature, had two founders at once. And it was cool to get the like story guy, marketing guy type of vibe and the hardcore science guy, and just such a stark difference. So that was cool. And we were able to get deep with both on different subjects. So that was kind of interesting. I like that. I feel like I already know the answer for you, but does this pass the lab test for you? Did they pass it, need more testing, or fail the lab test?
No, they passed for me. I actually really like the products.
Yeah, I love that. I think I'm always a little bit harder. I think there is more research that needs to be done on their specific formulations, but as we mentioned in the podcast, there's a challenge in research on this kind of stuff. So I do think overall, there's probably more research that needs to be done and can always be done, but I do think that this one definitely passed the lab test. It's obvious that Daniel is very hardcore about the ingredients that go in, and there's a lot of thinking that goes into that stuff. So I think it would pass the lab test. The one caveat would be the melatonin version of the sleep supplement. I just personally am on the train of like non-melatonin is better because it doesn't mess with your like endogenous or like the melatonin you make inside of yourself. Maybe using it to like recover or reset your sleep cycle or different things like that could be helpful, but that would just be the one thing that I would kind of be like, maybe that passed the lab test, but I wouldn't buy that version of it. That's probably a better way to describe it because it's still research backed and people using it safe and stuff. So it passed the lab test, but I wouldn't buy it. I would buy the other ones for sure. I'm excited to try them. What about you? Would you buy them? I mean, you got sent some, but would you buy some?
Yeah, I would buy them. I haven't tried the libido or the sleep. I'm the same for you with sleep. I'm actually somebody who never really struggles that much to fall asleep. And so I've never really needed melatonin. I think melatonin is a great tool in an emergency circumstance where you're like, I just need to get some sleep tonight, or I can't sleep, or something like that. It's something that you, in my opinion, don't want to build a dependency on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But I've personally tried kanna, and I think it's interesting for mood, and actually some people are kind of comparing it to like nature's MDMA at higher doses. I don't think that the dose would be that high in the gummy form to kind of reach those effects. But yeah, I'd be really curious to try the libido gummies.
Love that. Cool. What about any big surprises or lessons that you kind of learned in this one?
I'm trying to think. I'm blanking.
I can tell you mine.
Yeah, what was yours?
Mine was the concept of the dosages. Like clinical research for lion's mane, for example, uses 3 grams, and they have like 126 milligram. Well, they have a blend that has a total of 146 milligrams or something like that.
Mhm.
And it's just so you look at that and you're kind of like, oh, this is so much less. But
Mhm.
then what he was articulating about how there are different forms, you can use more potent dosages, like you can do different ratios. Like I thought that was really interesting. And then just also the challenge that supplement companies, gummies, things like this, the challenges that they face in relation to they only have so much space inside of these gummies to fit stuff.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it just was interesting to hear understand how clinical research could have one dosage, but there could be something slightly different in the actual dietary supplement that is of a different ratio or different like strength, which is cool. And then just understanding how some of these decisions are made. There's only so much space. So it's
Mhm.
just kind of interesting. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I thought the creatine gummy thing was kind of cool too. He was like, look at your gummies. If they're completely transparent, there's nothing in there.
I love tips like that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I love that. Was there any gotcha or surprise moments from your perspective?
I think just the creatine piece was interesting. I think that one I'll like take with me. I'll be like, okay, yeah, look at your gummies.
Yeah, that was a good one. I thought the other one that there's a couple things. The kanna not being on the website I thought was interesting. I don't assume malice generally ever. So it's just funny that it was like a marketing thing and they forgot to like put it back up there. So that their main ingredient wasn't on the ingredients was funny. The other one was psychedelic like effect or having a psychedelic experience, but not it being legal and not psychedelics. I thought that was interesting. And what I thought was most interesting about that is that it doesn't sound like it's been helping them. Like it's been making it a little bit harder for them in marketing and different things like that. And so that was the claim that I was the most like these ingredients do not affect the same systems neurologically at all. And I came at it from that perspective, but they were coming at it more from the clarity and the focus and some of the stuff people describe, even though they arrive at it in a different way, mechanistically, both sets of things, the supplements and the psychedelics arrive in small doses at a similar area. So I thought that was an interesting nuanced point when we talked about that. And they owned it too. They were like, yeah, here's where we're at. And they had reasoning and thought behind it. So I thought that was impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Actually, when I initially went to try them, I wasn't sure if it was a microdose or not. And I was like, oh, this is kind of confusing. Is it a microdosing product or is it not? Is there actual psilocybin in it? Is there not?
Yeah, that could be confused. There is not, as we can now articulate based on the conversation we just had. So, and it is not doing the same thing as a psychedelic, a traditional psychedelic, but the initial activation curve or the initial effect curve, maybe, I don't know how to describe that perfectly, is similar, maybe, is the way they would put it, and which makes sense. So, all right, cool. Any other thoughts or any other things from the pod?
No, I think that's all for me.
Yeah, same. That's a wrap on this episode of Decision Lab. It was a great time. Thank you so much for hopping in here, everybody. Hope the lab results gave you some clarity on this brand and on the supplements, honestly, gummies in general. If you love this no BS approach to wellness, be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. We're on YouTube and anywhere you can find podcasts. And if there's a brand you want us to investigate next, drop in the comments or hit us up on Instagram. We'd love to hear from you guys, or even an expert you want us to talk to, or a video you want CJ and I to react to. Drop them in the comments, drop them in the DMs. We read every single one of them, I promise. So please, please engage with us. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the Decision Lab. Thanks so much, everybody. Peace.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.